Imagine taking your child for a simple morning walk, and within minutes, your life is over. In one of Britain's most horrifying unsolved murders, a young mother was attacked in broad daylight, stabbed dozens of times, and left dying while her 2-year-old son watched helplessly beside her. But what happened next was almost as shocking as the murder itself. Police became convinced they had found the killer. The media agreed. The public agreed. There was only one problem. They had the wrong man.
The savage knife murder of a young mother in broad daylight stunned detectives in London today.
On the morning of July 15th, 1992, Wimbledon Common looked exactly as it always did. The vast stretch of woodland and open grassland in southwest London was filled with dog walkers, joggers, cyclists, and families enjoying the summer weather. It was one of those places where people felt comfortable letting their guard down. Children ran through open fields. Couples walked shaded paths. Parents pushed strollers beneath the trees. It felt safe. 23-year-old Rachel Nickell arrived that morning with her 2-year-old son, Alex, and the family dog. To anyone who saw them, they looked like countless other families enjoying a normal day outdoors. Nothing about that morning seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that within minutes, Britain would be confronted with one of the most shocking murders in its modern history. At some point during their walk, Rachel moved into a quieter section of the common. The area was partially hidden by trees and bushes. It offered privacy and peace, but it also created something dangerous: isolation. Somewhere nearby, someone was watching. Whether the killer had specifically targeted Rachel or simply seized an opportunity remains unknown. What is known is that what happened next was unimaginably brutal. The attacker suddenly confronted Rachel and launched a ferocious assault. She fought for her life. The struggle was violent. The attack was relentless. By the time it ended, Rachel had been stabbed and slashed 49 times. The level of violence shocked even experienced detectives. This was not a robbery. This was not a spontaneous argument. It was an explosion of rage, obsession, and cruelty. The killer sexually assaulted her before fleeing the scene. And throughout the attack, Rachel's young son was nearby. 2 years old, too young to understand what was happening, old enough to witness a nightmare that would follow him for the rest of his life. For some time, Rachel's body remained undiscovered. Then passers-by stumbled upon a scene they would never forget. Rachel lay motionless among the undergrowth. Beside her sat Alex, covered in blood, confused, trying to wake his mother. The image immediately became one of the most haunting in British criminal history. A helpless child sitting next to his murdered mother. The story exploded across newspapers and television broadcasts. The public reacted with fear. If a young woman could be attacked in broad daylight on a public common, nowhere seemed truly safe. Pressure on the Metropolitan Police became overwhelming. The investigation rapidly expanded into one of the largest murder inquiries Britain had ever seen. Detectives interviewed thousands of people. Hundreds of officers were assigned to the case. Witness appeals were broadcast nationwide. Tips flooded into police stations. Yet despite the enormous resources being deployed, investigators faced a terrifying reality. They had almost nothing. No obvious suspect. No reliable eyewitness. No murder weapon. No confession. No clear forensic breakthrough. The killer appeared to have vanished without a trace. Weeks passed. Then months. Public anxiety grew. The media demanded answers. Politicians wanted progress. Rachel's family desperately wanted justice. As the pressure increased, investigators became determined to find a suspect. Soon their attention focused on a local man named Colin Stagg. At first glance, there seemed to be little connecting him to the crime. He lived near Wimbledon Common. He often walked his dog there. He was socially awkward and somewhat isolated, but detectives became increasingly interested in him. Part of the reason involved a criminal profile created during the investigation. The profile attempted to predict the personality and behavior of the killer. Investigators believed Stagg resembled aspects of that profile. Unfortunately, a resemblance is not proof. Despite extensive investigation, police could not find forensic evidence linking him to Rachel's murder. No DNA connected him to the crime scene. No fingerprints implicated him. No witness identified him as the attacker. No physical evidence tied him to the killing. But instead of moving on, investigators doubled down. The more they focused on Stagg, the more convinced they became that he was their man. Eventually, they launched a highly unusual undercover operation. It would later become infamous. Known as Operation Edzell, the plan involved assigning an undercover female police officer to befriend Colin Stagg. Using a false identity, she began writing letters to him. Gradually, the correspondence became more personal, then flirtatious, then overtly romantic. The operation continued for months. Investigators hoped that if Stagg trusted her enough, he might confess to the murder. The conversations became increasingly strange. The undercover officer deliberately introduced discussions involving violence, dark fantasies, and sexual themes. She repeatedly attempted to steer him toward admitting involvement in Rachel's killing. But there was a major problem. He would not confess. Not because he was careful, not because he was clever, because he had nothing to confess. Again and again, Stagg denied murdering Rachel Nickell. Investigators kept pushing. The operation became more aggressive. Yet still they obtained nothing resembling a genuine confession. Despite this, police arrested him. The reaction was immediate. Many newspapers treated the arrest as proof of guilt. Public opinion quickly turned against him. For many people, the mystery appeared solved. The killer had been caught, or so they thought. Inside the courtroom, however, the case began collapsing almost immediately. The judge reviewed the undercover operation in detail. What emerged was deeply troubling. The investigation had crossed serious ethical and legal boundaries. The undercover officer had effectively attempted to lure Stagg into making incriminating statements rather than uncovering genuine evidence. The judge strongly criticized the operation. More importantly, the prosecution still lacked reliable proof that Stagg had committed the crime. When the evidence was carefully examined, it simply was not there. The case fell apart. Charges were dismissed. Colin Stagg walked free. But freedom did not repair the damage. His reputation had been destroyed. His face had appeared across newspapers. Millions of people associated his name with Rachel Nickell's murder. Even after being cleared, suspicion followed him. The consequences would haunt him for years. Meanwhile, one terrifying fact remained unchanged. Rachel's killer was still free. The failed prosecution created a disturbing possibility. What if investigators had spent years pursuing the wrong man, while the real murderer continued walking the streets? That possibility became even more frightening as new information emerged. Another name slowly entered the picture: Robert Napper. Unlike Colin Stagg, Napper had a documented history of violent behavior. He was a dangerous sexual predator. Investigators reviewing his background discovered alarming similarities between him and the offender they had been searching for. Yet for years, he had not been the primary focus of the inquiry. The realization raised painful questions. Had detectives missed critical warning signs? Had tunnel vision prevented them from seeing a more likely suspect? As the years passed, forensic science continued advancing. Techniques unavailable in 1992 gradually became powerful investigative tools. Evidence that once seemed useless could now reveal crucial information. Eventually, forensic experts re-examined material collected during the original investigation. This time, technology provided answers. DNA evidence pointed toward Robert Napper. For investigators, it was a breakthrough. For Rachel's family, it was a moment filled with mixed emotions. There was hope that justice might finally arrive, but there was also anger. The case might have been solved much sooner. As detectives dug deeper, the evidence became increasingly compelling. Napper fit the profile of a predatory offender. His history of violence matched the kind of brutality seen in Rachel's murder. The forensic evidence strengthened the connection. Piece by piece, the case that had remained unsolved for more than a decade finally began coming together. The contrast between the two suspects could not have been clearer. One man had been pursued relentlessly despite the absence of evidence. The other had left behind evidence that technology eventually uncovered. The implications were impossible to ignore. Years of investigative focus had been directed toward the wrong target. While that happened, the real killer remained unidentified. For Rachel's loved ones, the revelation was devastating. They had endured years of uncertainty, years of false hope, years of waiting. Now they were learning that critical mistakes had contributed to those delays. In 2008, the long search for answers finally reached its conclusion. Robert Napper admitted responsibility for killing Rachel Nickell under diminished responsibility because of severe mental illness. After 16 years, Britain's most notorious unsolved murder was finally solved. The confession closed one chapter, but it opened another. Questions about the investigation continued long after the killer had been identified. How had detectives become so convinced of Colin Stagg's guilt? Why had contradictory evidence been overlooked? Could the case have been solved earlier? Could other crimes have been prevented? Those questions remain part of Rachel Nickell's legacy. Today, the case is remembered not only because of the horrifying murder itself, but because of everything that followed. A brutal crime, a devastated family, a child who witnessed the unimaginable, an innocent man whose life was nearly destroyed, and a police investigation that became a warning for future generations of detectives. The murder of Rachel Nickell shocked Britain. The investigation shook public confidence, and the truth took 16 years to emerge from beneath assumptions, mistakes, and missed opportunities. In the end, justice finally arrived. But it arrived far too late for Rachel, far too late for her family, and far too late to undo the damage caused by one of the most controversial murder investigations in British criminal history. Because the most chilling lesson of this case is not that a killer escaped justice for years. It is that everyone believed they already had the answer. And when investigators become convinced they know the truth before the evidence proves it, the consequences can be as devastating as the crime itself.